So, we are continuing in our walk through the book of Hebrews. If you want to turn to Hebrews chapter 10, we're going to walk through the verses and stop and talk about things along the way. Let's remember our two questions that we're asking as we're studying the book of Hebrews. Who does the author of Hebrews say that Jesus is? Who is Jesus? And the second one is, what do I do about it? What do I do about it? What's my responsibility in light of this revelation? Now, a few weeks back, we had a section that almost entirely dealt with who Jesus was. And this morning, we will have a section that will almost entirely cover what we are to do about it. There's some glimpses of Christ's identity in these verses, but for the most part, these verses are an encouragement and a call for us to persevere through difficulty, to follow in the line of faith that stretches behind us, really to the beginning of human existence. As long as people have had relationships with God, there have been those who have testified and who have passed that legacy on, and we are the recipients of that legacy. To continue to persevere through difficulty and to treat it as training, as discipline that will help us to grow stronger. So let's look at Hebrews chapter 10. We'll pick up in verse 19. Therefore, brothers and sisters, since we have confidence to enter the most holy place by the blood of Jesus, by a new and living way opened for us through the curtain that is his body, and since we have a great high priest over the house of God, let us draw near to God with a sincere heart and with full assurance that faith brings, having our hearts sprinkled to cleanse us from a guilty conscience and having our bodies washed with pure water. Let us hold unswervingly to the hope we profess, for he who promised is faithful. And let us consider how we may spur one another on toward love and good deeds, not giving up meeting together as some are in the habit of doing, but encouraging one another, and all the more as you see the day approaching. If we deliberately keep on sinning after we have received the knowledge of the truth, no sacrifice for sin is left, but only a fearful expectation of judgment and raging fire that will consume the enemies of God. Anyone who rejected the law of Moses died without mercy on the testimony of 2 or 3 witnesses. How much more severely do you think someone deserves to be punished who trampled the Son of God underfoot, who has treated as an unholy thing the blood of the covenant that sanctified them, and who has insulted the Spirit of grace? For we know him who said, "It is mine to avenge, I will repay." And again, the Lord will judge his people. It is a dreadful thing to fall into the hands of the living God. Remember those earlier days after you had received the light, when you endured a great conflict full of suffering. Sometimes you were publicly exposed to insult and persecution. At other times you stood side by side with those who were so treated. You suffered along with those in prison and joyfully accepted the confiscation of your property because you knew that you yourselves had better and lasting possessions. So do not throw away your confidence. It will be richly rewarded. So we have in these verses 2 proclamations of who Jesus is. The first is that he is a new and living way that opens the door for us into the Holy of Holies, into the presence of God. So that's the first thing. And also a reminder that he's faithful, that God is faithful to his promise. We're given a whole list of things that we're to do in these verses. First of all, since we have this open door into God's presence, let's draw near. Let's draw near to God. We're told also to hold on to hope, the hope that we have because God is faithful, because God has provided this way for us, because God has shown that he desires to be in relationship with us. We have hope. Hope not in ourselves, but hope in God. Hope that God will continue the work that he started. We're told to spur each other on toward love and good deeds, to persevere and to hold on through hard times. We're given this foundation for our hope. We're given this foundation that even though life will bring us trials, even though we will face difficulty and sometimes persecution because of our faith, we're given this exhortation to persevere. The writer of Hebrews here gives us this lineage of faith is where we're about to go, that we walk in. This lineage of faith that we're a part of, that we're connected to. We're part of this line of people who have trusted God through the years, through difficulty, through good times, and they've walked in faith even though the things they hoped for were not fulfilled in their lifetimes. We're promised that we have and that we will receive the promise if we continue to walk in faith. Let's pick up here in verse 36. The author again says, you need to persevere so that when you have done the will of God, you will receive what he's promised. For in just a little while, he who is coming will come and will not delay. And my righteous one will live by faith, and I take no pleasure in the one who shrinks back. But we do not belong to those who shrink back and are destroyed, but to those who have faith and are saved. The author of Hebrews here is connecting us. He's saying we're not part of that group of people who shrinks back and falls away. We're part of this group of people. We're part of this group of people who have faith, who hold on to the hope that they've been given, and who are saved. He says in verse 1 of chapter 11, now faith is the confidence in what we hope for, and assurance about the things that we do not see. I was listening to another sermon this week from a different pastor, and he was talking about the Greek words in this verse. He's talking about hope and this assurance, this confidence, talking about faith and what it does when it all works together. And he summarized it like this. He said, basically, faith is our ability to see clearly in our mind's eye the fulfillment of those things that have been promised and to walk towards them. It's the faith that makes what is coming concrete, even though it hasn't yet happened. So just like if you and I were to plan a trip, we could say, I can see it clearly in my mind's eye where we're going and the things that we'll do when we get there. And we can imagine it, we can picture it in our minds. And that's what enables us to get in the car and drive the miles down the road and get on the airplane and fly for those hours in the air. And maybe even to get on a boat and go out into the ocean so that we can fulfill what we had initially only imagined in our minds. That's what the author of Hebrews is saying here, that faith is that picturing clearly in our minds those things that God has promised us. Being able to see it, to taste it, even though it hasn't been fulfilled yet. And that's what enables us to walk down that road until we do see it come to pass. Faith is the confidence in what we hope for, and it's the assurance about what we do not see. It makes it concrete, even though it hasn't come to pass yet. He says this is what the ancient people were commended for. And then he gives us this whole list of people. And yes, I'm going to read the whole thing. The whole thing. I'm not going to stop and talk about every individual person. We'd be here all day. But I think that the author gives us a very good picture of these people and their walk of faith. This faith that they were able to hold on to this picture of God's promise and walk towards it as a goal. So let's pick up in verse 3. By faith we understand that the universe was formed at God's command, so that what is seen was not made out of what is visible. By faith Abel brought God a better offering than Cain did. By faith he was commended as righteous when God spoke well of his offering, and by faith Abel still speaks, even though he is dead. By faith Enoch was taken from this life so that he did not experience death. He could not be found because God had taken him away. For before he was taken, he was commended as one who pleased God, and without faith, it is impossible to please God, because anyone who comes to him must believe that he exists and that he rewards those who earnestly seek him. By faith, Noah, when warned about things not yet seen, in holy fear built an ark to save his family. By his faith, he condemned the world and became heir of the righteousness that is in keeping with faith. By faith, Abraham, when called to go to a place he would later receive as an inheritance, obeyed and went, even though he did not know where he was going. By faith, he made his home in the promised land, like a stranger in a foreign country. He lived in tents, as did Isaac and Jacob, who were heirs with him of the same promise, for he was looking forward to the city with its foundations, whose architect and builder is God. And by faith, even Sarah, who was past childbearing age, was enabled to bear children, because she considered him faithful who made the promise. And so from this one man, as good as dead, came descendants as numerous as the stars in the sky, and as countless as the sand on the seashore. All these people were still living by faith when they died. They did not receive the things promised. They only saw them and welcomed them from a distance, admitting that they were foreigners and strangers on earth. People who say such things show that they are looking for a country of their own. If they had been thinking of the country they had left, they would have had opportunity to return. Instead, they were longing for a better country, a heavenly one. Therefore, God is not ashamed to be called their God, for he has prepared a city for them. By faith, Abraham, when God tested him, offered Isaac as a sacrifice. He who had embraced the promises was about to sacrifice his one and only son, even though God had said to him, "It is through Isaac that your offspring will be reckoned." Abraham reasoned that God could even raise the dead, and so, in a manner of speaking, he did receive Isaac back from death. By faith, Isaac blessed Jacob and Esau in regard to their future. By faith, Jacob, when he was dying, blessed each of Joseph's sons and worshipped as he leaned on top of his staff. By faith, Joseph, when his end was near, spoke about the exodus of the Israelites from Egypt and gave instructions concerning the burial of his bones. By faith, Moses' parents hid him for 3 months after he was born, because they saw that he was no ordinary child, and they were not afraid of the king's edict. By faith, Moses, when he had grown up, refused to be known as the son of Pharaoh's daughter. He chose to be mistreated along with the people of God, rather than to enjoy the fleeting pleasures of sin. He regarded disgrace for the sake of Christ as of greater value than the treasures of Egypt, because he was looking ahead to his reward. By faith, he left Egypt. Not fearing the king's anger, he persevered because he saw him who is invisible. By faith, he kept the Passover and the application of blood, so that the destroyer of the firstborn would not touch the firstborn of Israel. By faith, the people passed through the Red Sea on dry land, but when the Egyptians tried to do so, they were drowned. By faith, the walls of Jericho fell, and after the army had marched around them for 7 days. By faith, the prostitute Rahab, because she welcomed the spies, was not killed with those who were disobedient. And what more shall I say? I do not have time to tell about Gideon and Barak and Samson and Jephthah, about David and Samuel and the prophets, who through faith conquered kingdoms, administered justice, and gained what was promised, who shut the mouths of lions, who quenched the fury of the flames and escaped the edge of the sword, whose weakness was turned to strength, and who became powerful in battle and routed foreign armies. Women received back their dead, raised to life again. There were others who were tortured, refusing to be released so that they might gain an even better resurrection. Some faced jeers and floggings and chains and imprisonment. They were put to death by stoning. They were sawn in two. They were killed by the sword. They went about in sheepskins and goatskins, destitute, persecuted, and mistreated. The world was not worthy of them. They wandered in deserts and mountains, living in caves and holes in the ground. These were all commended for their faith, and yet none of them received what had been promised, since God had planned something better for us, so that only together with us would they be made perfect. Whew, right? I told you it'd be worth it. They didn't see the fulfillment of God's promises. They didn't see the Messiah come. Abraham didn't see the promised land delivered to his people. Moses didn't get to enter it. All of these people walked in faith anyway. They trusted God anyway. They walked with God anyway. They remained faithful even in hardship and even unto death. But we all receive fulfillment of God's promises together. Now in part, and one day, all together in full. Our continued faith and hope that God is faithful to his promises makes us part of this continuing line of faith. We could probably go back now in the last 2,000 years and add to that list, right? The martyrs of the Christian faith. Those who stood firm, those who saw God in action, those who joined God in his work for the kingdom. Our continued faith and hope in God makes us part of that. We can rejoice that we are part of this lineage of faith. They walked before us and they bear witness to God's plan and the promise that he has fulfilled over the years of history in Bible times, since Bible times, and is continuing to fulfill today and will continue to fulfill for eternity. God didn't just make a promise, fulfill it, and that was it. God is the living God who is active today. He's been active from the beginning. He will be active forever. We're going to go on to chapter 12, and the next verse that we're about to read, it's often been misinterpreted. It says, therefore, since we are surrounded by such a great cloud of witnesses. That's how it starts. Some have taught in this verse that you and I are being watched. That these witnesses that are being referred to are those who stand around looking at our lives to make sure that we measure up. But the truth is that the witnesses referred to are these people in this great line of faith who have witnessed God's faithfulness and who have testified with their very lives about who God is, about what God does. We are surrounded by these witnesses, not witnesses of what we have done, but witnesses of God's faithfulness. And they testify to us. They encourage our hearts. They testify about God's continuing faithfulness, and we're surrounded by them because we're part of this great family of faith. And we also get to be witnesses to God's faithfulness. We're not being watched under a microscope. We're being encouraged and spurred on towards love and good deeds. Let's go to chapter 12 here. Therefore, since we're surrounded by such a great cloud of witnesses, let us throw off everything that hinders and the sin that so easily entangles, and let us run with perseverance the race marked out for us, fixing our eyes on Jesus, the pioneer and perfecter of our faith. For the joy set before him, he endured the cross, scorning its shame, and sat down at the right hand of the throne of God. Consider him who endured such opposition from sinners, so that you will not grow weary and lose heart. Jesus is our Savior, our Redeemer, and he's also the ultimate example of how we should live our lives, how we should interact with God. When Jesus faced opposition, he didn't take the easy road. He didn't turn away. He didn't run away. But he endured the worst death that the Roman government could think of. He did it because this was the path that was set before him. This was the race that was set before him. And because he suffered, we know that we are able to endure whatever comes our way. Verse 4 says, in your struggle against sin, you have not yet resisted to the point of shedding your blood. I know that's true for me. Sometimes I feel like I have it bad. Sometimes I feel like the struggle that I face is impossible. We all feel that way sometimes. Sometimes we feel like the struggles we face are the worst ever. And they might be bad. They might be. I won't say that they aren't hard, but not one of us has yet resisted temptation to the point of bleeding. Not one of us has had to give our lives because of our faith. Others have. Others do every day in various parts of the world where being a follower of Jesus brings ostracism, brings beatings, and even brings death. We can do this. We can walk this road of faith. We can face what's in front of us because God is faithful. Not because we have it easier than other people, but because whatever comes, Jesus has walked that path before us. Let's pick up in verse 5 here. Have you completely forgotten this word of encouragement that addresses you as a father addresses his son? It says, "My son, do not make light of the Lord's discipline, and do not lose heart when he rebukes you, because the Lord disciplines the one he loves, and he chastens everyone he accepts as a son. Endure hardship as discipline. God is treating you as his children, for what children are not disciplined by their father? If you're not disciplined, and everyone undergoes discipline, then you are not legitimate, not true sons and daughters at all. Moreover, we've all had human fathers, human parents who've disciplined us, and we respected them for it. How much more should we submit to the Father of our spirits and live? They disciplined us for a little while, just as they saw best. But God disciplines us for our good, in order that we may share in his holiness. No discipline seems pleasant at the time, but painful. Later on, however, it produces a harvest of righteousness and peace for those who have been trained by it. Therefore, strengthen your feeble arms and your weak knees. Make level paths for your feet, so that the lame may not be disabled, but rather healed." When we face difficulty, so much of our ability to endure rests on our attitude towards what is happening. The author of Hebrews gives us one way of walking through difficulty in a productive way. He says, look at these difficult things that you're going through, and instead of seeing them as punishment from an angry God, look at them as though they are discipline, training you for something greater that's ahead of you. We all do this from time to time. We all even discipline ourselves, whether it's Bible reading on a daily basis or time spent in prayer or following a budget in our houses. We all will submit to discipline for our greater goals. Right now, I'm training for a half marathon, and that means that there's days that I run when my feet hurt, and I run when my back hurts, and I run when I'm tired, and I run when it rains, and I run in the sun, and it isn't always fun. It's not. Sometimes it's painful. But it's like it's a little self-imposed hardship so that I can be ready, so that I can be stronger for this greater thing that lies ahead of me. It makes me better able to choose difficult things. And it'll prepare me, hopefully, eventually, to run 13.1 miles. Hopefully that eventually will be next month, because that's when my half marathon is. But I didn't start at 13 miles. I didn't start going out running 13 miles every day. I started with 1, and then 2, and then 3, and so on. Each mile is difficult in its own way, but every mile added together will prepare me for this goal that lies ahead. When we face difficulty, we have a choice. We can view it as punishment, we can view it as hardship, or we can view it as an opportunity for growth. We can see it as damaging, or we can find a way to make it productive so that we can gain strength and endurance. And even then, when we're not facing hard times, we find the fruit continues to develop in our lives what the author of Hebrews says is a harvest of righteousness and peace. Righteousness and peace in our everyday lives if we will view difficulty as a discipline. So the author of Hebrews in these chapters has said that Jesus is the path into the presence of God, the one who opens the door, who is faithful to his promises, and who will train us like a coach to endure the most difficult of circumstances. And our job is to follow in the line of faith that stretches back through time to the distant past, marked by lives of people who persevered. We're to follow in their footsteps, to hold on to the hope that we have, the promises that have yet to be fulfilled completely, while we are bearing witness also to the faithfulness of God in our own lives. And as we walk in faith, we embrace the challenges. We embrace the training. We see that it brings strength and endurance that benefits us in hardship as well as in our everyday lives. These chapters are meant to be an encouragement for us, not one that says, when you follow Jesus, everything else will be rainbows and sunshine. But when you follow Jesus, even when the hard times come, they're not fruitless. They're not a waste of time. They're not disabling. These challenges are training us. They're making us stronger and better able to endure, better able to live our lives, walking in paths of righteousness for God's name's sake.